That's substantial savings. And I think that thinking about taxis as being part of a sustainable urban transportation system, that we as researchers have sort of missed an opportunity to push taxis as being an equity-enhancing and sustainable aspect. And in the context of areas like car sharing, we've sort of dropped the ball, and we've let other people define the problem at hand and define the solution. So taxis can be very much a part of a green strategy for cities. Now, taxis as a complement to transit, I've looked at how the taxi fleets have expanded over time. I'm sure you're all aware we've spent billions and billions and billions of dollars in North America on expanding our transit networks over the last 40 years. Now, we have not thought about expanding the taxi fleets as a necessary part of generating transit mode share. If you think about transit-oriented development, which is very, very popular, many cities are pursuing it as an important strategy toward sustainable transportation and affordable housing. But nobody ever considers expanding the taxi fleet or making some other accommodation so that you can have high-quality point-to-point service within these areas that are supposed to be transit-oriented. And I think that this is a missed opportunity. And here you can see that in these cities that I'm displaying on the table, some of the cities the population has gone up, some of the cities the population has gone down. There's absolutely no correlation between population changes and the changes in taxi coverage. And the cities that have expanded their taxi licenses, it has largely been to get back and forth to the airport. And Ray highlighted some of the problems with that. So we're not. There's not a clear understanding about what the relationship is between taxi service and transit. So this is looking at some descriptive statistics of taxi trips in New York City. We're using the data collected for all the yellow cabs. So this is all the yellow cabs, about 13,000 of them in New York City. And this is a sample of 200,000 trips. And we've run the sample many times, and we can tell you it's quite representative. So taxis have about 1 2/3 passengers. So they're actually they're using the space quite well. The typical fare amount is about $10. The tip amount is lower than that. Many people will pay a tip in cash. The trip time is about 11 minutes, 12 minutes. Now the trip distance is under 3 miles. Now under 3 miles, that also coincides nicely with a typical transit trip. The time between service, so this is the time the taxis are spending cruising for fares, or what I'll show on the next slide, that they're coming back from the outer boroughs into Manhattan, tends to be about 20 minutes. And the fare per mile is about $5.50. So this is looking at the average fare over time, adjusted for inflation. And again, thinking about how has taxi service changed, and how is taxi service being incorporated into a complete way of thinking about urban transportation. The average fare has gone up, but adjusted for inflation, it's remained largely flat. So the fares in New York City have not been increasing with the rate of inflation. So they're getting relatively, they're staying relatively the same. This again is a missed opportunity. Now, one of the things with taxi service, and this is where it becomes much more apparent that it's a complement to transit, is there are asymmetrical origins and destinations. In this map, this is about 20 million observations from February 2010, 1 month's worth of trips. And the green dots represent origins, and the red dots represent destinations. So all of the people who are dropped off on the red dots, somehow they got to their original origin, and they did not do it by taxi. They did it some other way. Now, in the world of travel demand modeling and in the world of transportation planning, we think about trips and we think about journeys and we think about how people will go to work and then they'll go to the store and then they'll go to the gym and then they'll go home and then so on and so forth. But we very, very rarely consider the idea that not only do journeys involve different types of trips, which we do all the time, but that people are actually making different choices based on mode. And so people are making journeys with multiple modes. That is a very, very key aspect of the taxi system. And that is how it interacts with the transit system. So, so the asymmetrical origins and destinations is a very interesting and very important nugget of information. Now, just looking at this again, this is looking at Union Square, just a very small neighborhood. So not only do we have asymmetry over space, but we have asymmetry over time. So Union Square is a popular neighborhood in Manhattan. There's a lot of restaurants, and you know, there's a lot of activities going on in the evening. And if you look at the dotted line, the black dotted line that goes up and down on the top, you'll see that that is the percent of all trips that are origins. So you have this neighborhood that's generating a lot of origins, far more origins than destinations at nearly all times a day, but that changes depending on what the time period is during the day. And so this is, you know, these are not be-all, end-all analyses, but these are very suggestive that there is an opportunity to integrate taxi service into transit planning. And this is something that cities can do. It's not something that you have to wait for federal funding of transit finance or state funding. This is very much in the world of cities and the regulatory apparatus. So with that, I will leave it. Here are some acknowledgments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. And without further ado, jumping straight to Jonathan Peters from University of New York, Staten Island College.
Hi, it's a real pleasure to be here today. And David King and I and Matt Doss have been working on this problem. And we're going to go through some very quick slides. I'm going to be very fast and New Yorkish here. The reality is, if you look at some of the current transportation planning books, here's a standard book, 475 pages, no mention of the word taxi in the whole book. Here's a book on environmental justice or social inclusion, 350 pages. No word appears of taxi. No time does taxi appear in the whole book. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we can see in terms of the taxi data. Next slide. Do I do it now? What's this? What do I do? Let's see. Let's see if I can do it. This one? Okay. We're going to talk about the taxi medallion data. New York City is really fascinating. It's a huge market. Matt Doss led the fight to get a new taxi medallions fare collection system. What that included was a GPS tracking of taxi cabs. And New York City has a taxi cab base that's extremely large, so I want to tell you a little bit about it. I'm going to rush through all these slides. You can absolutely come up to me later and we'll talk about it in any detail you want to look at. The data is about 378 million records for 18 months. There's 550,000 trips a day in New York City. To handle that kind of data, you have to have a supercomputer, and lucky for us, we have one. That is a Cray there, by the way, on the right. And we actually took 2.5 days, not in the Cray, but one of the other supercomputers. It took 2.5 days to sort the data. I like the box and the ladder, by the way, that I got in the picture. New York City is really fascinating as a market for transportation. It's a very, very multi-layered system. We have pretty much every type of transportation system you can think of. We have trains, we have taxis, we have subway systems, we have buses. And so the interactions that go on in the market are very complex, including taxi, black car, and et cetera. In addition, New York City is a hotbed of road pricing, which is one of my main areas of research. 25% of the tolls in the United States, about $2.6 billion a year, are collected in trips that are going in and out of New York City. So obviously, it's really interesting to watch how the road network and people interact. We're going to show you some of the data, and I'm going to quickly rattle through it. There's 378 million records for 18 months. This is the count of records. There's about 550,000 records a day in the database. We're not going to look at most of this. I'm not going to show you a lot on the real full data because it doesn't add a lot of value. We sample a lot. There's a 500,000 record sample. You can see that we can actually do what's called desire lines, get an idea of where the attractors are. You can see out in the lower right-hand corner the attractor of Kennedy Airport there. And the other one is, I think, Newark, okay, out on the left. For smaller samples, and Matt already went through some of the, sorry, Dave went through some of the details on statistics, so I'll let you look at that, but you've already seen it. But again, we can look at the average fare per day. The average number of trips in the 200,000 samples are 300,000. The average fare is about $11, $10.50. The average distance of trip is about 2 miles and change. It does flex a little bit by day of week. There's an average speed of a taxi in New York City is about 13 miles an hour. Average fare per mile is about $5, as we highlighted. Average trip time is about 11 to 12 minutes. Now, what's really interesting is you can start to do some comparisons there. And again, this is 200,000 records only, but what you can see is the relationship between distance of trip and the actual time of the trip, okay? And again, there's congestion in New York City, so the times do vary quite a bit. Also, the relationship between distance and the cost of the trip. But again, there is variation based upon, notice the horizontal lines on the data. Do you see that? Those are probably the airport trips. Kennedy Airport has a fixed fare. It's $40 from Lower Manhattan to Kennedy Airport. And so you're getting kind of a clumpiness in the data. And here's the relationship between time and total cost. And obviously, again, you see that positive relationship, but again, that kind of clumping. For the 20 million records, you obviously see that pattern that Dave already showed about the origin-destination asymmetry. But what's really neat when you look at the data at low-level detail, this is Manhattan, Midtown Manhattan, and this is only a small sample of data, but you can see the level of granularity and how low a level of market you can actually study. By the way, there are no streets in this map. The data that you're seeing, the alignment of the data is just the taxi trick pickups and destinations that are all occurring along those routes. We actually studied LaGuardia Airport. The trips to the airport in New York City are really fascinating. And obviously, New York City is interesting because we have 3 major hub airports, JFK, Newark, and LaGuardia. There's heavy taxi usage to and from the airports, with more of it being origins from the airports. They're really interesting to study because they tend to be longer than average trips. And the other thing that's really fascinating for us is that there's a toll option in many cases on the trip. So you might decide, and the person who makes the choice about the toll is actually the passenger. The user of the taxi cab, not the driver, decides whether or not to take the toll route. And so that's interesting because we have a lot of discussion about how people use toll roads and toll routes. I just saw the 407. I was really excited when I came up here, up in Toronto, because I've heard about the 407 and I want to see it. So here's the origins to JFK, and we looked at the area south of 59th Street because that was where they were proposing a congestion pricing zone in New York City, and that's also the main CBD, the Central Business District, and these are origins to JFK, and there's the destination data. What's really interesting, you actually see the terminals in the data. You can actually see, you also see that string coming in on the left is kind of like a train. We think people might be paying early because they're late for their flight or whatever. So before they wait to get to the terminal, they actually pay the fare. This is overlaid on an aerial photograph of Newark, and you can actually see, again, this lines up really well with the aerial photograph. I can tell you what terminal somebody is getting out of for a particular trip based upon the GPS data. So again, these are really hot topic, taxes and tolls, or taxes and road pricing. So people around the country are concerned in the US and also abroad in the world about using new forms of transportation finance. And so it's kind of interesting to see how people use tolls when they're paying for the ride. Basically, we looked at this market, the Central Business District of New York, and we looked at how people actually decide to take, whether or not you should take a toll route. So we looked at the area south of 59th Street, the yellow on the left, and going to LaGuardia Airport. Again, Newark is no good because every route to Newark is tolled. So there's no choice involved. And JFK is no good because it's a fixed price. So if you make some speed increase, if you make the trip quicker, you don't save any money. LaGuardia is the one, because LaGuardia has a trip that the longer you spend in the cab, the more money you're going to pay. The longer the trip is, the more you're going to pay. And if you pick the toll route, if it saves you time or it saves you distance, it may be worth it for you. So this is the one we're going to study because it's got the right economic conditions. So there's the origins to LaGuardia. And there's the destinations. Again, you can see the terminals actually in the data. And what we found is that the toll trip does not really turn out to be very optimal because the users actually save relatively little in terms of time. They save about a minute of time. They increase the speed of the trip by about a minute, but it costs them $4.50. And to make that worthwhile, you have to have an income of about $170 an hour for that to work out for you. Now, from the driver's behavior, and it's interesting because roughly 2/3 of the trips took the toll route. And we actually think that may be the optimal route, the shortest route. We're still working on that one. We've only had the data for 8 months, but it's interesting and fascinating because the person who's choosing to take the toll route, if it saved them enough time, it would be worthwhile. They only save about a minute. It costs them $4.50. It would be optimal for the driver, though, because the driver is probably going to